We did a whole year. Can you believe it?
Wow.
And here we are, and this show could not be better.
Mhm.
I am so excited that we get to have Linda as our very first guest to season 2. You guys are going to be absolutely amazed by this beautiful woman and her beautiful heart, but more importantly, by her obedience to God. When God told her to do something, she got off her keister and did it, which a lot of us don't do. So I'm going to let Kim tell you all about her, but thanks for joining us. Welcome back, and we are so excited. We have a great year. Great year.
Well, Linda, I'm just so excited for our guests to meet you and to understand what's behind these words, because the words themselves are powerful, but the story is dynamite. The story is explosive. Linda is the founder of He Knows Your Name Ministry. She's the author of a nationally recognized and award-winning book by the same name, He Knows Your Name, subtitle, How One Abandoned Baby Inspired Me to Say Yes to God. Linda is rooted in the conviction that every life is sacred to God and that naming children matters deeply. Her ministry gives children dignity and honor in death by celebrating their life. I'm already choked up.
I know.
You can find more information about Linda and what she does at HeKnowsYourName.org. Linda, welcome to our little podcast here. We're so pleased to have you.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and I'm always honored to be just given the opportunity to share the testimonies of Jesus and what he's been doing in and through the life of my heart and my family and my community, and then through the ministry of He Knows Your Name. I've just learned so much about God, and I just love talking about it.
All right. Well, our show today is called Honor and Dignity in Death, and that is really how your ministry was born. And before our show's over, we're going to find out just how far-reaching your ministry is. But can you start at the beginning? How did honor and dignity in death become your life's purpose?
Well, I'm just having this thought now, as I was sitting kind of like, I look at you, Heather, and I think you're sitting at a computer, like in an office setting like that. And that's kind of what I was doing. I was sitting at my computer one afternoon, and just the breaking news story that came across my news page just said, baby doe found in a dumpster wearing only a diaper. And I could see the construction tape, or that, big yellow tape they put around a crime scene, and all the sirens and police cars are, coming onto the scene, and people are gathering. And it's just right downtown, and I, captured by the compelling scene in front of me on my computer. And I see what they're doing in a dumpster. And I just can't believe this is happening in my city. And my mind starts swirling, and the questions start being raised in my heart. Like, how did this happen? Who did this?
Right.
And then what do we as a city do about this? And of course, as I just felt those things stirring in me, I really felt like God was saying to me clearly, like, get answers to your questions.
Wow.
And it was really in then that trail of finding out, what then happens to this baby, that I then clearly saw what I was to do next.
Wow. So my mind goes to, where do you begin? What were the first couple of things you did after you did your homework?
Right. Yeah. Well, I was watching the news on the screen, but then there were online articles kind of coming up as journalists were writing about it. And I saw the name of the Indy Star journalist, and I thought, well, I'll just call him. And he's writing the story. I don't know, maybe he'll know, And so I called him and I said, what happens to the baby? And he said, I really have no idea. I just know that the baby will go right to the coroner's office, and there will probably be an investigation. And so every single person I spoke with gave me more information and was teaching me, about the process. And that's what I did. I called the coroner's office, and, the receptionist answered the phone, and I said, I'm just calling about this baby. And I didn't even know really what to ask. I just said, I just need to know what happens to the baby. And she said, well, it will be a criminal investigation, and it will probably be very lengthy. But you're the only one that's called. And that little phrase kind of in quotes went above my head, like it was just straight from heaven. Like the calling is yours, you know?
Wow.
And I thought, I know those words and I know that God uses them. And I felt like he clearly said, this is yours. And I just said to them, you know, what happens to the baby? And this receptionist said to me, well, the baby will probably be put in a mass grave if not claimed. And, you know, I'm like, wait a second. We live in the most resourced country in the world, and it is the 21st century. How in the world do we still have those?
Right.
And I'm questioning her, and she's kind of like, well, you know, a pauper's grave. I'm like, no, I don't know a pauper's grave. Like, what? I feel like I'm reading a history book, you know? And then all I could think of was my mother, who we had just buried the June before. And we'd given her so much honor and dignity and beautiful, you know, a dress was put on her, a funeral was given, the scripture was chosen, flowers were chosen and, you know, arranged for her, the whole thing of it. And I just thought, my mother was a child of God. This baby's a child of God. There's too much discrepancy here. I don't understand how this can be. And I said, would you please put my name on that case? And I want to make sure that this baby is honored in death. And I want to give this baby a funeral. And I want to give this baby a name, because baby Doe is not a name. And a dumpster is not a grave. And a diaper is not burial clothing. And when God took those statements that were completely opposite of what the news breaking story was reporting, I knew it was God, because his economy is so upside down to the world. And when the world gives us one picture, he gives us another. And I knew clearly that that was going to be really like something. I didn't know. Now looking back, I can see it was like the blueprint, you know, of what he was giving me. But I just knew it was from him and that it was for me to do something about. And I said, I don't care how long this criminal investigation takes. I've got all the time in the world, you know, like I can be here, you know, and I thought it was going to be a once and done situation. And so, you know, that was really the very beginning of that day. And, you know, I just went to bed that night feeling just like I couldn't shake it. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't stop comparing this baby to my mom and all of just that I knew. And so honor and dignity just came out of that. And that was just like the compassion of my heart was like, I have to see this through and make sure that this baby is honored in death. And, you know, little did I know that that was going to ignite something in the coming days and weeks and then months and then years, that through that 13-month criminal investigation, I called 13 months. I called the coroner's office every single Friday morning for all that whole time. And I just kept pressing on them, asking questions, tell me what's happening, tell me what you can tell me, you know, because there's so much confidential information happening around DNA testing and different things with pathology and all. I'm learning all these words and talking to people at the coroner's office, and I'm thinking, you know, what am I doing calling these people? But I was becoming friends with them, and we were establishing relationship and building trust. And that's what God was doing more than anything through the time we were waiting for the baby, for, you know, like details and test results to come back and all of that, the waiting was really God crafting something that was unfolding a story that I had no idea he was doing.
He was building the foundation. Yeah.
So how did it go from helping? Well, first of all, what did you name that baby?
Well, that turns out that baby, after 13 months, I get a call from the coroner's office. This had never occurred to me, but they said, we found the mom.
Oh, wow.
There's no mom. And the media had demonized the mom into probably being the one who put the baby there. And I was like, what do you mean you found the mom? Oh my goodness, you know? And they said, well, and she's not at fault.
Wow.
Okay, then who is, you know?
Wow.
And it's like, what's happening here? And the story kept getting, you know, more and more complicated and more interesting. And when they told me that it was the funeral home director that had illegally disposed of the baby, I mean, I was like, okay, that's a whole other criminal investigation now that needs to happen.
Yes, yes.
And now there's a mom. Now I've
Oh.
been planning this funeral this whole time. I have everything in place. And all I could think of was, can I meet the mom? Because now what I thought I was doing for the baby, I want to do for the mom, because it's for her to do now, because she's on the scene, and she is all of a sudden present and, violated and confused. And like all of this has been happened to her. She's now a victim, and this is all news to her. And all of a sudden, my questions just went from like, I had a few questions to 1,000 questions. And I said, would you please get a hold of the mom and let me meet her? And then I did. And her name is Nicole, and she had named her baby Nicholas. And so I did not name him. She had named him.
Oh, wow.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, he passed or was stillborn or something, and she trusted this funeral home to, do what they're supposed to do, and they disposed of him in a dumpster.
Right. Correct.
Unbelievable.
Right. So she is a very under-resourced woman, and she had gone into the hospital, had a very traumatic loss, and was very sick herself. And then mentally crashed and went into a very deep depression. And under-resourced people with under-resourced family members, I get very isolated. And she was in the hospital for a very long time, first of all. So she signed paperwork, signed that the baby would be cremated, thinking at some point I'll go back and get the baby's remains and take care of that later.
Yeah.
And she comes out of the hospital, she's in a very deep depression, and she starts trying to call this funeral home, and they don't answer the phone. They don't answer the door. It's months and months go by. And, the more I've come to understand the heart and plight of under-resourced people who've had traumatic loss and tragedy in their life, they are people who really feel like they do not have a voice. And they don't know how to fight for themselves in the ways that we would know, in what, like advocating kind of way, that is so foreign to them. Mm-hmm. And so, when you take a person who's a victim and has no resources, doesn't know how to advocate for herself, and people don't answer their phone calls and don't respond to them and answer the door, just start getting quieter and quieter. So when I showed up, she was very confused about who I was. She thought I was the police. She couldn't at all figure out, who I was, and we couldn't have looked more opposite from each other. And here we are meeting at the coroner's office. And I said to her, I've planned this whole funeral for your baby. And she said, oh, I can't have a funeral. I can't afford that. And I said, well, I'm going to take care of that for you. And I really want to just invite you and your family to come to what I've already planned. And I want to give this to you and honor you as the mom of this child.
Oh.
And she really couldn't grasp it, But then I was sitting there with her at the coroner's office, and I'm thinking about what I've been told is that the baby will need to be released from the coroner's office and go to a funeral home in order for that. Okay. So I'm sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, the very first thing I have to ask her is to trust me that the funeral home I've chosen now for her will in fact do what they're really supposed to do.
Right. Right.
And so I'm thinking all this as I'm sitting with this woman who's very, very traumatized.
Yeah.
Very angry, very confused, and does not know what to do with me. And I said to her, this is what I'd like to do for you, very simply put. And then I said, but before we talk about all that, the very first thing I need you to do is trust me. Mm-hmm. Will you just go home today? Like, take in all that you've just been told. She had to identify her child. So she's been very traumatized again.
And I said, after 13 months?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And I said, would you just trust me? And that's the very first thing I need you to do. So would you just go home and pray? Just pray and ask God if you think you can trust me. And I said, I'll call you in the morning. And I did. I called her in the morning, And I said, so I'm just going to ask you, what have you decided? Do you think you can trust me? And she said, yes, I can. And that was, of course, the huge shift of then me stepping forward into putting the plans that I had put in place and executing them with the partners that I had established, in that last year to come alongside me and work with me on this. And there were just the side note to this story that's so amazing and just so indicative of how I've learned walking through life with people that are in traumatic situations of loss, is that, I meet them on Good Friday in a loss and a tragic situation. And I'm bringing the hope of Easter morning to them. The foundation of my ministry is Easter weekend. And yet in Good Friday, there's just always compounding grief and compounding loss to people's lives. It's because they are where they are, and they are who they are because of all their baggage, And as I'm talking with her about the loss of Nicholas, and I'm watching this woman, she's very traumatized and very emotional, which makes perfect sense. Of course, I wasn't questioning that, but I could also tell as she talked about more relationships in her life and other things were starting to boil in her. I was like, there's something else here. And then she said, I'm 40 years old, she was 42 at the time. And she said, I'm childless. And if I wouldn't have had that abortion at 17, I'd have a child today. But now I've lost this one. So now it's compounding grief and compounding loss and trauma. And I was like, oh, wow. And so then starting to work with her through her grief and saying, okay, well, we're going to honor this baby. You've named him. Why don't we honor your other baby? Have you ever considered naming your baby? And let's honor both of them graveside so that together you will know both of your babies have been honored. And you will know that where Nicholas is, Natasha is. And we worked through that. And that was I was just learning. I was going to school on grief with people, right there in the field, basically. And I thought, wherever women are, like what we said earlier, there is loss, there's miscarriage loss, there's abortive loss, there's just so much. And for me, I've never had abortive loss, miscarriage loss, or a stillborn loss, but I've lost other things. I've lost other people. I've had a lot of cancer loss in my life with friends and family, that together grief is still grief. And, when we, with compassion and with the hope of Jesus and the hope of Easter morning, come alongside each other, it's just amazing how organically we can love each other well as neighbors. And that's all I was really trying to do with her. But I was learning so much, but that was from, the October of 2009 to November of 2010.
Wow.
And that was finally the closure of that situation. But so much had already happened in my ministry that by the time I did that funeral, God had already completely established He knows your name. And so what He started back here, He ended up showing me 13 months later that this was something He was building foundationally in me, in this ministry, that I just never could have ever imagined He was going to do. So Nicholas, I always think of Nicholas as being the one who's changed my life forever, a baby that I never met, changed my life, my life. And he is changing the world. So.
Well, the beauty of that is that even though his life here, we don't even know if he ever took breath. I don't know if he ever took a breath here, but boy, did he fulfill his purpose here.
Right.
Amen.
And for a woman like myself who also miscarried, and for Heather who's also miscarried, to know that your children's lives had a purpose, even if they never drew a breath.
Right.
And for me, my child's purpose was to introduce me to my God as a comforter with a capital C. I didn't know what that meant in the Bible when it says, I will send you the comforter with a capital C. I didn't know what that meant until I experienced that grief. And it's like my son introduced me to a facet of God I had never known. And Linda, you're the one on our first phone call several weeks ago who pointed out to me that my son's life had purpose.
Mm. Mm. Well, I think your awareness of that is going to continue to unfold the rest of your life, because it's eternal. Purpose is eternal. And when we look at legacy and how we meet God in these places, God's greatest miracle was performed at the grave. So suffering, especially long suffering, is going to birth something in us if we have the courage to step into it. Yeah. And grief are, like I think I said to you, there are no shoulds in grief. Grief is something that God, I think it's a tool of His to use to transform us and make us more like Jesus. How else compassionately can we know Him in death and in life? And even though I encounter people in the death of a tragedy, I celebrate the life that was, so that together the death and the life can birth purpose. And I think when I encourage women to name their baby, it takes the name and it's like, you look at there's the tragedy of Good Friday, which is the miscarriage, the abortion, the loss. Okay, that's the name. And we give the baby a name, and that's Easter morning. And so purpose comes, I think, in naming too, because then we name, and it's not the miscarriage, the abortion, that it's not that anymore. It's a person, and it's a name that we can then attribute life and legacy and celebration and value and worth and image bearing to. And that's what Jesus does. He constantly calls us by name, calls people by name, through the Gospels. And when He does that, it's like He's placing identity on them. And when we realize we walk with the fingerprint of God on us, and that gives us purpose because He calls us by name. And you just said too, the capital C of Comforter. As I've walked out the life of this ministry, the scriptures have come alive to me, come off the page and alive in ways that I knew what the book of Isaiah said about how God has summoned us. He's called us by name. He mentioned us from the time we were in our mother's womb. But now I'm like seeing it like it's a full-blown movie all the time. And I love how He does that through these heartaches in our life.
Yes.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's just so beautiful. It's just incredible. So tell us how, what year was that, by the way, Linda, that you first saw the article on your computer?
That was October of 2009.
Okay. And so it was in 2010 that Nicholas was buried.
Right. And God had given me a vision that I was going to be standing outside over a very small casket. And I thought the whole time that as I was planning for his funeral, that it was going to be for him, and that was him. And in October of 2009, of course, the story I just told you was coming about. And I had started, like I said, calling the coroner's office every Friday. And a couple of months in to calling them, they said to me, "Oh, we were going to call you this morning." And I said, "Oh, you never call me."
I didn't know we did that.
Yeah, what's up? Like, oh gosh, what are you going to tell me now? And they said, "Well, we have another baby."
Oh,
I was like, "What?" I never saw anything on the news about another baby. And she said, "Well, does your organization, take care of babies that are left at the coroner's office? Because we have a baby here that's abandoned." Of course, my head is spinning. I'm like driving down the street, and she's saying all this to me. And I was like, I have to pull over because I can't even grasp what you're saying to me. And I was like, I have to call you back. And I hung up the phone, and I just said, "God, what are you doing? What do you mean there's another baby? And this baby's abandoned at the coroner's office. And how in the world could that be? I don't even understand."
right.
And what does she mean? Does your organization do this? Like, I'm it, And I was like, okay. And I just felt him say, "Take my hand. This is what we're going to do." And
Praise God.
You have no 5-year plan. and you'll probably never have one in light of this, but these are my children, and I need you to be, really like my agent of caring. And it was like, just keep walking it out. So what shocked me was Nicholas was not my first funeral, and all the plans that I had put in place for him, I used for another baby boy named Zachary. Wow. And I ended up having a funeral for him just months after that October 9th news story broke.
Oh, wow.
And so when I stood in front of his casket, I was like, so is this the vision? Because at that point, I don't know about baby Nicholas or any of that coming to be. I'm then thinking, oh, so maybe this is the vision I was getting, and this is the baby I'm supposed to do it for.
I kept thinking it's going to be one baby.
Yes, still thinking like, this is the one. Okay, it's not the one I thought, but this is the one. And so I just, got to understand that this little guy was 5 months old, and he had died at his grandmother's home.
Oh.
And his mother was homeless. And after they did a very quick criminal investigation on him to make sure there was no foul play in his death, they determined it was SIDS. And they went back to the family, and no one would take claim of the baby.
Oh.
And I'm thinking, okay, there's so many complexities to this story, because I'm thinking, the mom, the grandma,
yes.
You've been able to contact aunts and uncles and this whole family, because by property taxes, they can get a lot of information about families and where they live in Marion County.
Wow.
Marion County, like a lot of counties in our country, provide some money to families that are under-resourced that need help to bury their loved ones.
Right.
So then I'm learning about that if they just went to the trustee's office and made an appointment, they could go in and get a little help. And the coroner's office has a staff of people that helps them understand some of those things and take those next steps and make an appointment for them. And they're just saying, no, 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 person after person after person. And I still have not fully, even after 9 years, grasped how a whole family says no to a baby. And then I started thinking about the whole culture around abortion, where a mom makes that choice. Oftentimes a mother takes a daughter in with her. And, it's like, okay, there's a few people that know about this, but it's very secretive. But in this case, the coroner puts a death notice in the paper, and they put the people's name in there, and they basically try to shame them into doing the right thing.
Wow.
And so even communities will come forward and say, hey, I know that was your baby.
Right.
And they still say no. So
the baby was 5 months old?
5 months old. So I was like, well, if this mom had help, kind of this is my forward thinking about if I could help the mom. So go to the mom and tell her, I will do this whole thing for her. She can just come.
Right.
That's kind of like when I got to the Nicole story, why I got there with her. Cause I thought, well, I'll just do for her. Like I was thinking I would do for this other mom, that I'll do this for you. You just come, because I want to do the right thing for your baby. And they said, I don't think she's going to do it. She's not going to accept your help. And I said, okay, so a coroner goes to the homeless community where she is staying at the time, and they talk with her about it. There's this lady, she wants to help you with this. You don't have to pay for anything, do anything. And she says no. And I said, well, then I want her to sign away her rights to her baby. I just knew in my heart, this whole adoption thing started coming to me.
Wow.
Okay, I'm claiming in death. How is this any different? And when you think about the coroner's office is run by an elected official that's governed by the state, every single bit of paperwork they do is a legal transaction and legal paperwork, just like a funeral home. So a funeral home, a director is licensed and certified. They've got to go through all of the state requirements. All their paperwork is all documented. So I said, come up with a form and go back to mom and ask her to release her baby. And I have that in my file. I mean, I have her handwritten signature. I release my baby and my rights to my baby. So when Zachary, the first one, came to me, he was like my first adoption. And I was trying to grasp, as I'm signing paperwork at the coroner's office, and then I go to the funeral home and I'm signing paperwork. And then what really, really did me in of understanding the level of what this meant for me was when I went to the cemetery and I said to them, where's the plot in Babyland? Because every cemetery has a Babyland section. And I saw where they were, and I went over and decided where he would rest. And they said, now you need to sign the property agreement. And I realized a property agreement is another legal piece of paper that says, I own that property that this baby's going in. And I said, what does this really mean at the end of the day? And they said, even if the bio mom comes back someday with an attorney, she can never have access to this plot of land. It's yours. Wow. And I was like, oh, okay. So to the end, like the end of the road of all this paperwork, it's clearly an adoption and ownership, basically he is mine. And no one can dispute that because the elected officials say so, And the interesting thing is that this whole system's already been put in place. I have not had to do one thing legislatively, not ever hire an attorney, not ever have to know anything more than what I know, but rely on those that do. But I realize that my yes to God has required about 100 other yeses. And when God orchestrates all of that to happen, which he has now all these years and all these times, I just sit back and marvel at him and realize he is orchestrating something that is so beyond me. And he knew from the beginning of time that these babies would have for such a time as this. He Knows Your Name would mark this generation and change the way people talk about and treat babies that are abandoned. Now I know, out in the wilderness, out, at the coroner's offices and at hospitals. And there are already all these legal things in place. All I need to do is step into them and build a relationship. And now I have equity and trust built with all these people that they now come to me. I just claimed a baby on Friday. Oh. So I am going to be doing a funeral in the next week for a baby that was left at a hospital. And I have a relationship now with my inner city hospital. When a mom gives birth there and her baby passes and she leaves the hospital saying she's going to come back when she gets her resources together or her family support together. And then she never comes back and never answers her phone. But when they go through the legal process there, which is quite lengthy, at the end of it, mom releases her rights, or she terminates it just by nature of not doing anything.
Right.
Then I can claim the rights to the baby. And I just posted something the other day saying I was actually in Michigan for a family wedding, and I got this email because I knew we were working towards me claiming this baby. And my funeral home director said, I knew you said you were traveling, so I sent you this document by way of an electronic signature. We're getting so technical. Right. And I literally take my phone, click open, there's the signature line, and I do a little signature on there, and I click send, and off it goes. And next thing I know, I've claimed my baby.
Wow.
And I just it just is amazing to me, the process that God already put in place, that by just me doing what he asked me to do, all the work so many other people have done was just like, all I had to do is say yes and walk through a door, and it's right there for me to do.
I'm thinking of that scripture that says he makes a way in the wilderness, a highway in the wilderness and a road in the desert. Mm-hmm. I mean, I love that road in the desert, because how do you move the sand in the desert to make a road? Only God can do that. And that's what you're saying. It's like God moved the sand and just said, now walk this path, Mm-hmm. And Linda, how many babies do you have now?
That's what I was saying.
Honestly, I think I have 13. I think this is 13 that I fully claimed through abandonment. And, I've got quite a row of them at the cemetery that I use. And it's just incredible. And, and some I've resourced and helped families with. But I have 2 full rows, and all my headstones say he knows your name on them. Oh. And I just walk the row, and I just cannot believe what God has ordained to be.
And do you know about how many parents you've helped to name their children and to grieve with your incredible message of name your baby and change that tragedy into a celebration?
Yeah, I've tried to kind of come up with a number of families impacted. I know it's over 125 families across the country that I've resourced or done something with. I mean, there's lots of moms even that have named their aborted babies. But I think I have headstones in about 8 different states now. And I think I've placed 120 headstones, 117 or 18 headstones maybe now all over the place. Wow. Where I've helped resource them. So I really, in the last 6 months, last 3 months, have kind of stopped. I just haven't had time to calculate, like, where am I with some of these things, But it's just incredible, the stories, because while I was also waiting for Nicholas, what God did in that waiting time was show me the different pathways that my ministry was going to go. And really, once I buried Nicholas, then after that, everything was already established, because I had baby Zachary. And then the coroner called me about another situation with a family that had lost their son to a drowning accident. He was 13, did not know how to swim. And they had been able to collect what they needed for a funeral, but they were grieving because they could not get a headstone for him. And the coroner just has such a huge heart that this mother who was pregnant, when at the time she lost her son, she just was grieving so much that she kept calling them and wanting more resource and wanting more help. So when I was talking to Alfie one day, the coroner, and I said, we're waiting for baby Nicholas. She said, I've got this other mom who is just so upset. She does not have a headstone for her son. Does your organization buy headstones? And I was like, I don't know. Do I? And I
don't know.
Maybe.
Like where do you even get them? I mean, I don't know, And the interesting thing about that particular family was that story was very riveting to me, because it was the first family I was getting to know. I was waiting for baby Nicholas. I had baby Zachary, and then I had this situation, and I'm like, okay, so now there's a mom, and I don't know what to do with this. And I thought, well, I want to meet her. I mean, I just want to meet her and hear about her son. And I said, would you arrange a meeting with us? And so Alfie said, yeah, come to the coroner's office and I'll have you meet her. So she calls the mom. Her name is Addie. And I get down to the coroner's office and have a meeting with Alfie first. And then in comes her assistant, and she says, well, the family is waiting in the conference room. And I was like, the family? I thought I was just meeting a mom. And she's like, no, the whole family came.
Wow.
And I just like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? And Alfie said, well, put them in the conference room by my office. And she said, there's too many of them where they won't fit in that one. So
dear.
Put them in the big one. And so I looked at Alfie and she said, I've got you. Don't worry. Like, I'm staying with you.
Get this. Yeah.
And I walked in, and this African-American family was jammed in this conference room, and they were openly grieving and weeping and wailing. Mm. And I'd never seen anything like that. And I just walked in and thought, oh my gosh, what am I doing? And they were kind of sitting around the table and then standing all around the walls. And the only seat open was the one at the head of the conference table. And Alfie was like, well, sit down. And I had my Bible with me, and I just sat down and I said, could we just pray? Like, I just have to pray out, And so I prayed, and then I said, tell me about your Tim, And they proceeded to tell me about this boy. And one of the things I realized that was so impactful, because before I went there, I listened to all the news stories about his drowning. And I had been in Michigan when it happened, so I didn't see any of the news around that story. But when I watched it all online, every single station really talked about a kid that was out after a curfew. What were he and his friends doing jumping the fence at a pool? They made him sound really bad. They talked about the cornrows in his hair, and it was terrible. Well, I walk in this conference room and I'm with this loving family that is grieving the loss of their son, cousin, friend, nephew, grandson. And all of a sudden, Tim was like this regular old 13-year-old boy who was very loved by his family.
Right.
And I'm learning about him and how he did so well in school. And he had just gotten a scholarship from his little Bible study club to go to camp. And, I was like, oh my gosh, this kid. So I realized, just the judgment that is also on some people that don't look anything like me. And they have to carry stuff that I don't even know anything about.
Right.
And the reason this mom wanted a headstone so badly was because her son was buried at a city cemetery, which is in an area where, in the part of the cemetery where several other people they know, of course, are buried. Many of their plots are not marked. And when we went over there, it was like, well, there was so-and-so who was killed in a drive-by shooting. There's so-and-so who was a drug dealer. There's so-and-so who, got shot when he was robbing whatever. And I realized that they looked at this boy and thought, if he doesn't have a marked grave, he's going to look like everybody else.
Right. Right.
Wow.
And they wanted the worth and value placed on him by putting his name in the earth. And I started realizing, like, we all have this desire to mark our generation with our name. Our name is all we have and leave here because it holds who we are and our legacy and our place in our families.
Yes.
And I started to understand through them the importance of this. So of course I granted that to them. They were so grateful. And then I ended up meeting with Addie for a year every week, discipling her. She came to Christ, just a beautiful mom. And we've established a scholarship fund in her son's name at the park. Inner City Park. It's the most rundown, crappy park ever. But these kids in this neighborhood love to come there and swim and play and have their sports. And we put a big plaque up on the building because I said, this is the place everyone says, that's where Tim died. I'm like, no, this is where Tim is going to leave a legacy that when you see his face now on this building, on this big bronze plaque, this Tim is going to be the one who gives swim lessons to all the kids who can't afford them.
Amen.
So
yes.
for 6 years, we have a scholarship fund that provides 2 sessions of free swim lessons for all the children of the Douglas Park community. And every year, this mom, in the middle of winter, Addie's in Walmart and has little children run up to her and say, Miss Addie, I took swim lessons from Tim. And I know how to swim.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
Yeah. And we had 20 kids this year take swim lessons and pass, their water safety. And so I get to the park and I found a really great business here that loves to donate sandwiches. And I go to the park the last day of swim lessons and I share the gospel with all these families that are there and all the lifeguards and give them, feed them their dinner, give them food to take home. And all these kids, come into the park and they have a very different memory now of Tim. And that's the whole upside down economy of God, that even in death, we can have the joy of Easter morning. And that's what we're living. And that's what Addie can now live with and make her, like she says, I couldn't get out of bed that whole first year. And now I can get up because I'm now the mother carrying legacy. I'm carrying the memory of my son and the purpose on his life. It's changing his entire community. and the whole
Yes.
Indy Park system. They never had a scholarship fund in a boy's name before. Well, now it's like other people who've had situations can think of, what can I do to change, my community because my child had an accidental death.
Yes.
And anyway, it's that just shaped everything. So by the time Nicholas was buried, I had gone through Zachary and Tim and then Nicholas. And really from there, that 13 months prepared the way for everything that I do with He Knows Your Name.
Wow.
Amazing. Amazing.
Well, and I just love biblical symbolism, and the number 13 means love.
Sorry.
And it's like those 13 months just prepared you to pour God's love out in a way that no one's ever seen. I mean,
Right.
If somebody were to hear about an abandoned baby in another part of the country, can they contact you?
Yes, definitely. Yes, people do it all the time. I'm really not a news watcher myself, and I don't comb the globe and the internet looking for internet, stories, but I wouldn't know where to start or stop if I did that,
Yeah.
And so the ones that come to me, I believe, are handpicked for me. And I know that then God put that on someone's heart and they saw something and they just decided to send it to me. And so there has basically not been a story that has come to me that ended up not being something I was able to do something about. I've been really thankful for that. And so I really rely on other people to bring me things. And then I just know that it's from the hand of God, which is just amazing.
And
but I wanted to say, you brought up something about Nicholas lived 13 hours. You bring up the theme 13. So
wow.
He lived 13 hours. And then the criminal investigation was 13 months. Yes. And I have another baby I took care of that lived 13 minutes. And it's just amazing to me how much that number keeps coming up and back to me. When a family from Ohio contacted me and said they had a baby that lived 13 minutes that they did not have a headstone for. I mean, I couldn't get in the car fast enough and get over there.
Right. I hear you.
I was like,
13 hours.
I hear you. 13 minutes is like, there's something to this.
Yes.
And that family, 3 generations of family had been completely fractured. Many of them had never met each other. That when this mom got pregnant at 40 years old and had this baby was born premature, and they knew the baby would not live. So they lifelined the baby to Indianapolis, and then the family came. So it was this big trauma to the family. And by the time I got there to talk with them about a headstone, I had 3 generations of family standing with me to hear the stories about what had happened generationally in this family. And
Wow.
I said, this baby lived 13 minutes and brought peace to your family in 3 generations. None of you have been able to do that in all the years you have lived.
Right.
I said, so the legacy on this child's life is peace. So you all have to now carry his legacy by living in peace with one another.
Oh, so good.
Not one of those family members had ever heard the gospel or owned a Bible. And when I shared the gospel with them, graveside, 3 generations of family came to Christ.
What? Oh.
Yes. There's nothing like an opportunity in tragedy and in death and at the grave than to share the gospel and have it land on people, because their mortality is staring them in the face.
Right.
And there's no other place that we just stop and we have to think about things, and we have to consider things. We have to think about our choices and think about what we're worth and think about our own purpose. And when we give value to another life, we feel value. It's just who God is to do that to us.
Yes.
And I just realized the opportunity, these headstones and these celebrations of life are really tools for the gospel. It's just where God is saying, just come gather and be a church without walls here at this place that's so organic, where you smell the fresh turned dirt, and ask yourself, who's going to stand with me when I'm the one
Right.
in
Right.
there? And what's my life going to be about?
Yeah.
It's just so powerful.
Wow.
And you're an amazing woman, Linda. I just want you to know that.
Oh.
You are just amazing. You are inspiring me to do something. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to do it just like you.
But you bring up a good point, Heather, and that is that the testimony of Jesus should inspire us, right? Because doing good, sharing the love of Jesus is what it's all about. And that is what's contagious for me. That's what most satisfies my soul and gives me purpose. And it's why I do what I do, because my life is so much richer because of the people I've met and the purpose on my life, fulfilling the calling of God in my life. But it's never been my goal to franchise He Knows Your Name all over the country. And it's never been my goal to say to anybody, do what I do. This is mine to do, and this is what I'm doing.
Right.
But that there is a yes out there for you. There's a yes for everyone.
Right.
And there is an invitation from God that has your name on it. This one had my name on it. And I want to encourage people through my faith journey, through the fact that I wrote this book as a memoir, to say my faith journey is that I knew that God had value in my life, and I know He has purpose on me, but I also know He's a God that still speaks. He says it in John. He says it in Ezekiel 2:1. I have something to say, and will you stand up and listen? And I think we live in a culture that doesn't believe that anymore. I know there's a lot of great churches that don't even teach that anymore. And I want to be the voice in my generation to my peer group and to resourced women to say, God is speaking, not only through His word, but through the power of the Holy Spirit. Are you spending time with Jesus every day? Everything I do is birthed out of my intimate, sacred time with Jesus every day. And that's why I hear Him. That's why I'm abiding in a way that's so sacred and intimate that I know when He tells me to stop my car and turn and pull over and listen to something, or take a phone call or not take a phone call. And I think that that's the compelling part of the journey I've been on, that I so want these stories to be so contagious and infected with hope that people want to say, I want that. I want to experience the gospel in that place and realize that God is alive and Jesus is powerful, and that God still resurrects hope from the grave. I see hope come from the grave all the time. And I don't step off the grass at a cemetery before my next errand is given to me by Him. And He multiplies everything. That's how I know it's of Him, because He's a fruit-bearing God.
He certainly is. Wow. Just amazing.
It is beautiful, Linda. I'm so moved by God's love that a life, that is no longer, is still a life worthy of adoption.
Amen.
That's the part that I'm just gonna stop this podcast and go ball. I'm serious. Hold it together. Just things are rolling. I'm telling you, because I'm having a moment with God. Over your story. And that's what you're saying. What I'm hearing you say is, I want every baby's life and every ounce of my story to cause people to have a moment with the God who made them, the God who knows their name. This isn't just about the headstones, and that's breathtaking enough, but it's about every set of ears that hears about the headstones, and every set of ears that hears you speak and reads your book. It's that the God who loves all of these babies is the God who loves you, those of you who are watching today and listening today. That your story isn't Linda's story or mine or Heather's, but your story is precious to God. And so is your life, and you have a purpose. And most of us have been given so many more than 13 minutes or 13 years to figure out what that purpose is and to do something with it. And that's so my heartbeat for women, that you have so much purpose. And your purpose might come exactly like Linda's, totally by accident, while you're scrolling through the internet one day. Or your purpose you may have known from the time you were a little girl. The question is, what are you doing to figure out what it is and live it? And
I do feel like it's important to answer just that right there, because people say to me, oh, you're the yes lady. And I'm like, I am not the do-gooder that says yes to everything. I've realized that I want to say yes to God. I'm not saying yes to every single thing that comes my way, to people and entertainment and opportunity. I realize that if I don't say no to a whole lot of things, I have no capacity and margin to say yes to God. So I have to spend time with Him to hear Him and know His voice. But I also have to then walk out my life saying no to Linda, because Linda likes shiny objects and Linda likes to play with her friends and do, I like what everyone likes, right? But I have to make space to make sure that I can hear. And there's really practical disciplines that I have in my life that I don't watch TV. I don't have it on during the day ever. I have no magazines in my house. I don't get on just the internet. Like, I post stuff and I'm off. I don't scroll. It's a waste of time for me, and it zaps my energy. And like I said, I'm traveling. I've just claimed a baby, and I'm doing a funeral next week in Elkhart, Indiana, for a baby that was murdered by its mother. The father's driving from Illinois. I'm having this funeral. Like, I'm kind of like, I'm looking ahead at the next 2 weeks, and I'm thinking, I have to plan ahead for the next 2 weeks of my emotional capacity, because I know what's going on in my personal life. Yeah. And I know what's going on in my church life. And I know what's going on in my ministry life. And I know that if I am not quick to say no as well, I will not have the capacity to say yes. And so I want to say to women, take stock of your yeses and nos.
Linda,
good advice. Such good advice.
You are so preaching one of my sermons. One of my taglines that I talk about in Few is, whenever you say yes to something, you're automatically saying no to something else, and vice versa.
Right.
There's no such thing as the eternal yes. And, you also, that was a perfect segue into my next question, because in my opinion, what you just described is one of the characteristics of an extraordinary woman. Mm. An extraordinary woman knows you have to take stock of your yeses and nos, and you have to give your best yes. And your best yes is always God's purpose in your life. But then beyond that, it's what you're saying. I'm going to take stock of my emotional energy, knowing what's on my plate. It's just wisdom, Mm-hmm. But when we talk about extraordinary, I have 2 questions for you. I wonder what you think makes an extraordinary woman. And kind of the secondary question is, has your journey of He Knows Your Name changed how you view an extraordinary life?
Oh, that's a good question.
Well, I think my journey with He Knows Your Name cannot be separated from my personal life, It's my faith journey. And, like I said, I lost my mom, and then He Knows Your Name was birthed. And then I lost my dad. And the summer I lost my dad in August, my first grandchild was born in June. And that summer, it was like, the baby was born, and I became a grandmother. I'm a honey to her. And then my dad died. And I really felt like God took me by the shoulders and said, my dad was the last one of that generation. And it's like He turned me and He said, you're going to now learn about the generations and my heart for the generations and why they're so important to me. And the scriptures, so much scripture about generations, it's going to start, you're going to start learning it from this organic place inside of you. And I've realized that I think extraordinary women impact generations. And it's not just, we need to be present, of course, and value what we have right around us. But I think having perspective about the generations has been something that has really changed me in the last several years, as I've understood legacy in a much bigger way. And when God took me by the shoulders and turned me, it was like He said, you're done here. You've taken care of your parents. They've been entrusted with much with them, but it's over now. Right. Now I want you to turn and go this direction. And that was really towards not just my grandchildren, but all that generations, my children to my grandchildren and everybody in between age-wise. And what's interesting too, is that even my speaking engagements have grown in these last few years to include middle school students, high school students, college students. So It's not just women or my peer group or church people or whatever. It's like, and I look and I'm like, I realize that the message God has given me transcends the generations. And when I wrote my book and the marketing people called me and said, who's the demographic for your book? And I said, well, I don't mean to sound arrogant, but there isn't one. Saying yes to God transcends everything, gender and everything. And they kept trying to nail me down. And then one day after my book was released, I got a text from a girl going to college. She was driving to college reading my book. And I said, take a picture of you in the car reading. And then my CPA sent me a picture of her 100-year-old father sitting in a lazy boy in his nursing home reading my book.
Wow.
And I sent it to my marketing people and I said, this is what I mean. When you give the testimony of Jesus, it's for everybody.
Right.
And I think that we have to take our story and realize that it's got to be rooted in who God is and who we are in Him.
Yes.
And then realize that it's really for everyone. It's not about our experience. And I mean, being 58, I was raised in the Oprah culture of your experience qualifies you and equips you to do what you're supposed to do in your life. Well, I don't have any infant or pregnancy loss or abortive loss. Like nothing technically equips me to do what it is I'm doing. God equips me. And I think an extraordinary woman realizes that she is equipped and qualified because she is a woman and she's been made reproductively to multiply in the kingdom of God. And when I started looking at everything through the vantage point of where do I stand on scripture to do this next thing, it empowered me supernaturally to go do it. And there's the He Knows Your Name ministry. But then there's the ministry of my book. And really when God, really spoke to my heart about writing this book, I was like, I'm not a writer. I don't really have a desire to do that. There's so many other people around me that have that dream. And that was not my dream. But then he then quickly gave me scripture to show me that's what he wanted me to do. And he gave me Revelation 19:10. And it says, worship God, ! The testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. And all of a sudden I totally got it. Like that's what my whole book is. These are all testimonies of Jesus. And I will share them with anyone who will listen. And then the result is up to God. Whatever transformatively happens in people because they heard this story of faith and this story of hope and this story of just the miracles of what God can do when he wants to catapult a whole community into action, whether it's safe haven baby boxes, changing legislation with the safe haven law, taking a documentary about He Knows Your Name to Russia. I'm just sitting here going, oh my goodness, I'm just going to tell the story and then let God decide where he wants to tell it.
Amen.
That I'm standing on the foundation of him. And that when I look at other women and I realize that if we have any of our own agenda in anything, we will fall short of really making the change that God calls us to make.
Exactly, yeah.
Linda, where can our viewers find the documentary on He Knows Your Name?
Good question. Probably on my website. I think I have a link on my website to it. Mm-hmm. So there's no safe haven law in the entire country of Russia, and they have an epidemic number of abandonments. And so they wanted to find who could mentor them through that. And they found He Knows Your Name here. And then they also found Monica Kelsey with Safe Haven Baby Box in Fort Wayne, Indiana, because she's changing the world with her Safe Haven Baby Boxes.
Yeah.
A resource for women in crisis with crisis pregnancy. And those boxes are saving lives, and babies are being adopted in 30 days that are placed in there. And it's an adoption option, and it's just blowing everyone's mind. So to partner with Monica Kelsey through the life and legacy of one of my babies with the Safe Haven Baby Box has been such a joy.
Wow.
I read about that a little bit when I was doing research with you, and it kind of stopped me in my tracks. I was like, wait, a box? And I didn't really get it. But when I read it, I was like, this is absolutely brilliant. It's absolutely amazing. So I'm so glad that you guys partnered like that. It's the perfect story. It really is.
Yeah. Well, she asked me to give testimony about baby Amelia to the Senate and the House of Representatives because they were writing legislation for it. And she said, they just don't get it. They don't think of abandonment as being a face and a name of a real baby. Right. And so I went into the State House and, carried this. And I said, this is baby Amelia's temporary headstone. And I had them all feel it. And this actually weighs exactly what she weighs. My goodness. And I said, when you feel the weight of honor in a casket, you realize that that's a real life. And if we can give a mom in crisis an alternative to anonymously, safely surrender her baby, we are giving that baby a future life. And it's it's been amazing to see.
Just amazing.
Well, I think of that saying that says, if you really want to make a change, don't focus on the problem, focus on the solution, or, come up with a solution. And I think what impacts me most is, without preaching any sermons about being pro-life or anti anything, you have, it's like what you're doing just is parting the Red Sea in terms of like the magnitude of your message about life. What you're doing, not what you're saying. I mean, it involves a message from your mouth, but your actions are preaching this sermon that's on blast about the value of life, the value of a baby's life.
Right.
To me, it's the perfect answer to this fight and this battle that's been in our culture for so long. It's like, you're not fighting, you're just going out there and you are acknowledging life, and you're giving every baby honor and dignity, and it just puts the message on blast. Nobody can, I'm picturing all these politicians holding that headstone.
Right.
I know, I love that. Love it.
Life. And it's like there's no argument that could do that. There's not even the most eloquent and the best attorney. You just said, here, hold this. That's what this baby girl weighed.
Right.
Oh, that's real. That's that's a person.
Reality.
Yeah.
I love it, Linda. It's just, and like I always say, God has the most brilliant ideas. And so what I love is the brilliance of God's idea for you. And that he spoke to you and he knew you would listen. He trusted you with this message and this mission. And, I want women to understand that there's a message and a mission God wants to entrust to them, that he chose them because he knew that they would hear and they would listen and they would carry it like a baton and they would run that race, And so as we wrap up today, I just want to thank you and extend to you an offer. If there's anything we can do to help you in your mission, please let me know.
Thank you. Thank you.
Everything you're doing. You're not only helping families and these lives and babies, you're empowering women by being a living example of a woman of purpose. And I think that's what excites me most for the few women who get to hear your story is, here's someone who is just going along in the corporate world, or sitting at a desk on the internet, and boom, now you just had it. Your life intersected with God. It was a divine intervention, and now you are a woman of incredible purpose. But you had no clue. You took one step, and then another, and you kept thinking it was, oh, maybe this is the baby. Oh, maybe this is the one. And God's like, oh, honey, we've only just scratched this.
Well, I think too, you bring up a good point about, the doing. And I think that, as I was saying earlier, about where is our credibility, where is our equipping coming from, and our value, and realizing that when we really are doing what God called us to do, he equips us and qualifies us. But also it is in the doing that we get authority. And stepping into the chamber at the Senate House or the House of Representatives and realizing that it was the doing that gave me authority to step in there. And then that's the confidence I was able to stand on, as I was shaking in my shoes. It's that, that's the credibility that has come with doing. And I think that I want to encourage women to say, go and just be doing things in your yeses that if they don't feel right, the fact that you're doing them will give you confidence over time, build history with God, but also give you the authority to continue to walk in places that make no sense to your being there and be empowered yourself to do what it is you're supposed to do. And I think I learned that too in a big way when I had first written my book proposal for my book. It was written as a Christian living book. And when a senior editor from a publishing house called me and said, I think it needs to be a memoir. And I didn't understand why he thought that. I said, the last thing I wanted to do was rewrite my book proposal. And he said, but I want you to write it as a memoir because a Christian living book is, let me tell you something. And a memoir is, let me show you.
Oh,
And that's what I did. And I said, Oh,
That a lot.
that's where all the authority comes from. And that's where I think the women are like nodding their heads and saying, "Oh, that makes a lot of sense."
Well, not
Yeah.
And I think we have generations that are like, "La la 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 la. I don't want to hear any more talking, telling.
Yeah,
I want you to show me." The hypocrisy of our generation is causing the younger generations to close their ears to us, and the only reason they listen is because of the doing.
So true.
Well, and the human brain is
Agree.
wired for storytelling.
Mm.
And what you did in your book is tell your story. And there is no more impactful way to transfer values and to transfer a message and to transfer truth than through a story. So, you know, that person who contacted you was definitely hearing from God, because your story in story form is going to already just be more powerful than you know, stating facts or talking about, you know, principles themselves. So how powerful, Linda. You are such a delight and a joy and an angel and a light in the kingdom. We are so thankful for your time today.
Thank you.
Can you share one more time your website, anywhere that you would like to share people to connect with you?
I would love,
Accept donations. Do you have any place where people who want to help can contact you?
My website is really all inclusive for everything anyone would want to know about me. Heknowsyourname.org I have more stories on there, testimonies. I have every single capacity of what I've been developing. I've developed the Elizabeth Project this last year, which is storytelling for post-abortive women.
Wow.
And that's been a really incredible tool for people to access. And then there's a contact button, which is an email directly to me, which is a great way. I get all of those very easily. And then there's a PayPal connection I have on there as well.
Okay, awesome.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Linda, God bless you and all that you do. We look forward to hearing more of your story.
Yes.
And about more lives being touched and more babies being honored and dignified because you said yes to God.
Yes.
Well, thank you for your yes, and thank you for your courage to meet with me and hear these stories, because they're hard, especially coming from your hearts of loss. And I'm inspired by your courage to just have your own personal healing and let this sit with you and let it be hard. And it's hard stuff, but it's also so life-giving because it's right where Jesus is. And he is the good shepherd and he wants us to know his voice. And I just love that both of you do know that. And Heather, happy birthday to you. Thank you for sharing your sweet day with us.
Happy birthday, Miss Heather.
Yeah. Thank you for your friendship to my dear sisters, Julie and Jane. And you guys have both made such an impact on their lives. And it's really fun to just continue to expand our circles of friendship.
Absolutely. I feel blessed just meeting you, because your words, one of the things real quick, and I know we have to go, Kim, but I wanted to let you know that I actually am writing a story in the devotional about the babies that I lost. But one of the things at the time, my hardest thing was accepting that I was allowed to grieve, because it happened so soon into the pregnancy. And as I'm listening to you, I'm just like, wow, I wish you were with me, 23 years ago, because it's so important for people to know that there is a process, no matter if you're pregnant for a week or 3 months or a whole 9 months. So I just want to thank you for being there for these women, because it's so important. And as I was writing my story, I kind of actually realized I never really did go through a complete grieving process, and it allowed me to do it through the writing. But I love that you're there for those women and you're telling them, this is okay. We're going to honor your babies. We're going to name them and we're going to put them and we're going to build a legacy around them. So thank you so much for saying yes. You're
saying yes to share your story. And be vulnerable in that way. And you are going to be a voice into the heart of women in a real quiet place, sitting in their bed, reading their story, your story, and it's going to minister to them. It's going to be multiplied. And that's what we just need more of. And I love that it's happening. We're seeing just bereavement support grow all over the place, and in hospital settings and on the internet, organizations coming alongside women. It's happening. Which is really encouraging.
And you're a big part of that. So thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you both so much for your time.
Yes, thank
Your
you.
huge hearts.
Thank you, Linda, for being extraordinary and telling your story.
Yes.
Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, you too. We'll be in touch.
Okay.
Bye, guys. We'll see you
Bye.
season 2. Next episode is going to be announced. Have a great day. Don't forget to be extraordinary.
And tell your story.